some of the data that I'm going to present to you, it's a mix, right? There's definitely some stuff in here from our friends at 451, Gartner, IDC, Forrester. A lot of it is my own observations as well. It's just a mix of things, but everything is substantiated. There's data behind the data, right? So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you I'm going to start with my perceived state of the union in terms of end user compute. So you've got a couple of things going on here. First, we have incredible breaches of well-known companies, household names, retailers like Target, Home Depot, software vendors like Adobe with their online cloud offerings. The folks that are in place to keep our data secure and our credit records safe, they've been breached as well. Really scary times. And then I think the most mind-blowing thing of all is that the folks who we pay to secure us and to keep our privacy secure, they've been breached as well. And this is only a handful of the breaches that have happened over the last year. Just absolutely mind-boggling. So from an EUC perspective, what do you do to prevent that? Especially when you consider that the way that most of this data was stolen was from a USB key in a machine. Now, with thin client technologies, Citrix technologies, VMware technologies, cloud technologies, there's ways to mitigate that are really good. So on top of that, you have this world of threats, right? We've already talked about earlier about Meltdown and Spectre, right? We had WannaCry last year. And the threats are just getting smarter and smarter and smarter. Add to that the various worms that we've had, the Trojans that we've had out there. It's really kind of a messy, ugly world in terms of what can affect an EUC environment. Now, couple that with the fact that we have an evolving, rapidly changing workforce. We have a workforce that wants to work from anywhere, any place, anytime, and on any device. A lot of complexity. We have breaches, we have threats, we have an evolving workforce. How do we put all this stuff together, right? And then, and then sort of what's fueling a lot of this stuff forward is the determined cyber criminals that we have. We have the usual suspects. We have Julian, we have Edward up there. And, by the way, the guy on the right, usually the money that the FBI puts on the heads of these people is $20,000, $30,000. The guy on the right, he's $1 million. He has the highest FBI dollar head count on his head for the internet crimes that he's committed. Scary world, right? So, how do you put this together with this evolving workforce and all these odd trends out there? It's just all awareness that we have to have in the EUC world. So, a couple of the trends that I've captured, and again, this is from talking to customers throughout the United States, a couple from across the ocean, and some of what I've seen in my past as well. And I think that these are sort of the elements of the storm that are kind of coming together that we need to make sure that we have a solid EUC strategy in order to mitigate these. So first thing, we have net neutrality, right? And the first thing, it's, oh, well, it's good, it's all happy, it's all open, right? But there's a problem here, right? Because suddenly ISPs can now deprioritize traffic. Well, what if they're deprioritizing a security patch that your Windows 10 desktop is absolutely reliant on, and it's not going to get it? So how do you, from an endpoint perspective or from an operating system perspective, how do you mitigate that? I think TOZIGEL has some pretty good technologies that help get you past that issue. And never even having to encounter what the impact of net neutrality could be. And then the other interesting thing, you talked about the cyber criminals on the previous page. They're all writing these incredibly smart artificial intelligence algorithms, right? So how do we counteract that? We counteract that with artificial intelligence, and that AI learns from our AI, and it's just sort of this ugly little cycle that keeps repeating itself. Again, and if you don't have the right endpoint strategy in terms of hardware or software, you could really be setting yourself up for a world of hurt. Developing countries, this is an interesting one that I came across when I was working with the folks I'm working with in Abu Dhabi. Abu Dhabi and Dubai are seeding some countries in like Central Africa, deploying technology, getting them lights, electricity, and technology. And the concern is this. What could happen if security is not right, and they understand they're not going to have people on the street, they're not going to have feet on the street to be able to provide support? What if people are using USB type of keys to steal data, et cetera? Things like that are going on. Not so much what's the impact of compromising one of those networks in a developing country, but if it's Abu Dhabi and Dubai that are funding that company, what if they use that as a point of entry to get to something significant like Abu Dhabi or Dubai, where all the financial services are being run. So kind of an interesting little twist there. Multi-factor authentication. Since my early WinFrame days, MetaFrame days, NT days, RDP days, we've always been looking for multi-factor authentication that works, right? And it's interesting, though. Why do we need multi-factor authentication? Because security at the endpoint is traditionally weak. So how do we mitigate that? How do we provide technologies that actually work at the endpoint regarding multi-factor authentication? Cloud. Very interesting, and I've got a couple of statistics about cloud. Cloud is here. It's here to stay. People who aren't in the cloud today will go to the cloud at some point tomorrow. It might be a private cloud, might be a hybrid cloud, might be one of these multifaceted clouds where you're sharing information, you're sharing slices of storage in AWS or Azure, but you're quite not sure who you're sharing it with. So how do you mitigate that, right? That's a concern. And the interesting thing is that the growth is just, you're going to see the curves in a couple of the growth curves in a couple of seconds, but it's just amazing how much data is moving to the cloud and what are we doing to secure that from an endpoint perspective. I would argue that if you're still running a full PC on the endpoint, you're really compromised. I don't care if it's a Mac, a PC, a Chrome, well, maybe not Chromebook, but you're really at a disadvantage. GDPR, I know that Doug spoke about the last thing, and I absolutely love his analogy that that's sort of the next Y2K, except I think that the implication of this is going to be a bit bigger. Because with Y2K, there was really no compliance. It was like, well, this is something we have to do, otherwise, what did he say, volcanoes are going to go off, right? This is a little bit different, right? Because the specs are very clear on what GDPR is, but what's going to happen after this are all the fines that are going to ensue for not being compliant. So from an endpoint perspective, how do you ensure that it is compliant and that you're able to do the necessary reporting to show it on a PC or on a Mac or even on a handheld device? It's very daunting at this time if anyone's reviewed the regulations. And I've got news, this isn't going to just be in Europe, right? This is going to be pervasive throughout the world. And then attacks from nation states, whether it's our friends in North Korea or wherever else on the globe, there are some pretty unfriendly folks out there who are just trying to make a name for themselves and make our lives collectively in some of the more peaceful countries around the globe a little bit more difficult. And then, like I said, mobility is here, but how do we deal with it? How do we make things location aware and geographically aware, and how do we do geofencing that's actually effective, right? Because the existing fencing or sandboxing technologies that we have, or this block and tackle brute force type of approach that we take for malware, antivirus, and whatever other types of threats is largely ineffective. And it's really interesting because what's happening is the sandboxes, we're now building a sandbox, and a sandbox around the sandbox, and a sandbox around the sandbox's sandbox. So it's getting a little bit daunting from a sandboxing perspective as well. So what about cloud? A lot going on in cloud right now. When I pulled some of the data together on this, I was just amazed, and it was one of the things I wanted to make sure that I had an opportunity to share with you. So it's the count right now, they estimate is about 3.2 billion people are accessing cloud-based data. 2 quintillion bytes of data are created in the cloud every day. Just an incredible amount, right? And the amount of people, 352 million people using smartphones around the world to all access cloud-based data, a lot of stuff going on there. And this is really interesting. So more than half of mid-market companies are all using cloud as their primary source, whether that's Google Docs or it's Office 365. And if you think about it, it's really interesting. In the startups that I've been consulting for in the San Francisco Bay Area, they're all using Google Docs or they're using Azure and Office 365. Nobody's using apps installed locally. Nobody has a data center. Nobody even has a server. So it's really interesting. I don't know if any of those are going to be the next, those companies are going to be the next Microsoft or the next Uber or whomever. I would like it if they did, but it's interesting because if they are, they're going to grow up and enter the enterprise from this cloud-based perspective. They're certainly not going to say, well, you know what, we've reached $100 million of revenue, now we have to build a data center. They're not going to do it. They're going to keep growing with AWS or Azure where it's really scalable. And then finally, apps from app stores, 280 billion will be downloaded this year. You tie that into the conversations that we had earlier this week about the importance of 5G and being able to get data in real time, and that number just keeps going up year over year. And then finally, for what it's worth, cloud is certainly recognized as a top 10 Gartner strategic technology trend. So I thought this is pretty interesting too, right? So, but is this real, right? We say cloud, 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 how many people are really doing it? But look at what's happening on the app side. This is where it gets interesting, I think, because we're at a point in time where new apps are almost solely being developed for cloud. They're not being developed for Windows, they're not being developed for Linux, they're not being developed for Mac OS X. They're being developed to be delivered through the cloud. Look at Salesforce.com, right? And by 2020, only 5% of the apps, and they suspect that these are legacy apps for pharmaceutical testing and things like that, will be developed for Windows. That's not many at all. And then you look at the companies I mentioned, SFDC, you look at SAP, Oracle, Adobe, where they're headed, everything is cloud native. Just unbelievable, right? And even Microsoft themselves, having managed that relationship on behalf of Dell and met with the executives who led server OS department, desktop OS department, application department, LinkedIn, Skype, on and on and on. Their only goal is Azure. You say, well, why would the server OS team be interested in Azure? Well, because they want to preserve the seats that they have. They want to ensure that people are still going to continue to use Microsoft. They're going to continue to use they're going to continue to use Windows Server technologies, DNS, DHCP, and things like that. They want to preserve the seats they have before they go somewhere else. Let's see, how'd that come out up there? That's actually easier to read than I thought it would be. I didn't want to come up with these charts that are, really hard to see. But, the bottom line here, I mean, sort of the tagline here is look at the growth in cloud, right? Various categories that are broken down there in terms of what type of applications and are they using infrastructure, et cetera. But the point is that it's all growing, regardless of whether you're using cloud for backup, DR, burst capacity or primary capacity, failover capacity, it's growing. Doesn't matter, apps, desktops, et cetera, everything in between, it is growing. And you might be able to tell I love data, so here's a little bit more. By the way, fun new feature in Windows 10, right? This is the good thing about using Windows. You can type emojis now. It's only been, what, about 12 years after Apple was able to do that? Window key, period. You can type emojis, but they come out funky. They don't come out in color. I don't know. Microsoft, go figure. So anyway, the point of this is just that whether you're considering IBM, Azure, or AWS, everything's growing. I don't have the final breakdown of the 2017 numbers. This is Gartner data, I believe. But it is just growing and expected to skyrocket. And just look at the shapes of those, the arrows on there. I mean, just the hockey stick trend upwards. And I think it's going to be even steeper than that. I think that if you interpolate a little bit more and carry this out through 2019, 2021, I think that we're in for quite a world of change. So, it's funny, as I was writing this headline, I thought there was a bit of a tongue twister. And then as I read it, I actually thought it was a little bit poetic, right? I'm feeling a little bit like Robert Frost here. IoT is hot, IoT is everywhere. And everything hot is becoming IoT. Huh? No? All right, so much for my career as a poet and an entertainer, but or a storyteller, but anyway, I kind of like the way it sounded. So I wanted to these are enterprise trends in IoT that I've recognized. And I think a lot of this plays into what Mr. DeFranco spoke about earlier this week, yesterday. But these are my own observations in talking to CIOs, CTOs, IT execs, people who are doing implementations, companies like Honeywell who are doing IoT technologies. And by the way, one of the things I had at Dell also was I did their IoT product line for gateways and devices to amalgamate data and stuff like that. So this is some of the latest and greatest I've heard around IoT. Blockchain, really interesting possible technology in terms of securing and amalgamating data and sort of doing an error check, a sanity check against data coming in from various sensors. Security, huge problem right now. I sound like Trump, I shouldn't do that. The huge thing. But security, right? How are we securing this? What are we doing for encryption? What should it be? What shouldn't it be? A lot is up in the air there. And then regulation. There is no real regulation around IoT right now. Does GDPR play into this? Does something else play into it? Just things you need to be mindful of as you're deploying things. Fog computing. This is a real interesting one that I've started to hear a lot about, and the concept being that IT and compute becomes like a fog, and it sort of drifts over, and you can sort of compute against any device that has CPU or GPU available for it. And then the growth in artificial intelligence, how does that play into IoT? Obviously, IoT can provide a lot of data, a lot of intelligence in terms of what you can do with IoT. M&A activity and consolidation, Doug Brown just hit on this, and that's a real big thing because, let's say that you have two tech companies, one's going to acquire the other, they both have IoT solutions. How do you put that together, right? And what about as companies acquire each other and one person has one type of IoT device to run their elevators and another has another to run the elevators and their skyscrapers? How do you put that together? There are no standards right now. IoT is truly the Wild West in terms of IT and what's going on with it. Cross-industry applications, sort of what I just said. Manageability of it, right? Good grief. There are no management protocols there. We were using a version of Wise Device Manager at Dell to manage the IoT endpoints. It's okay. I mean, it works, but it's certainly not a standard. Microsoft will tell you it should be SCCM, right? Other management folks will tell you it should be their stuff. There's a lot of startup companies in tech right now that are dealing with just management in IoT. Again, the point is it's the Wild West, but it's stuff that we have to take into account. Like artificial intelligence, right? This is the input from IoT sensors, gateways, devices can be a driver for machine learning. And then number 10 I thought was really interesting, right? EUC investigations. And I was talking to a CTO recently who told me that he said, you know what? Isn't our new endpoint, and I was actually talking about thin client technologies. He said, isn't this an IoT device? He said, think about it. What's different than this versus the refrigerator or the microwave or the lighting system or the HVAC system, right, or the building management system than this? It's just another endpoint on the network. And I thought, that's a really interesting way of looking at it. So is one of the trends in IoT that endpoints become IoT devices as opposed to thin clients, PCs, Macs, or whatever? Maybe it's just another IoT device. Just an interesting way of looking at it. The next chart I have here, this is something that I pilfered from Cisco, but I really like the way that, that they laid this out, just in terms of the growth and how they expect it to grow throughout the years. And just the fact that Cisco is looking at this, right, tells you that that's another interesting data point. Because I know that from my Dell experience, Dell is looking at it. From a competitive analysis perspective, I know that my friends at HP are looking at it. I know that Honeywell's doing a lot in it. Cisco's doing a lot. Obviously, there's a big network and communications angle there. Intel's looking at it. AMD is looking at it. Marvell's looking at it. I don't know of many large organizations that aren't looking at it. Oracle, SAP are looking at it for database stuff. And how do they actually amalgamate this data, analyze it, parse it, sort it, sift it, slice it, dice it? So, thought this would be interesting for you. So this is 100% my data. Since I departed from Dell, I have consulted for 10 companies. Like I said, I have 3 active companies right now. Out of those 10 companies, I've spoken with 50 of their solution partners. Could be a value-added reseller, could be a software vendor, and I also spoke with their customers. I am a huge believer that if you're not listening to your customers, you're probably building the wrong hardware, software, or solution. And this is what I found. So when I talked to a mix of CTOs, CIOs, and CISOs, security officers. And this is what I found. So in talking to the CTOs, and there's one common theme in here, you can probably guess it. These are in no particular order, but these are sort of the top 5 of what's on their mind, right? Security, graphics processing at the edge, being able to access data vaults securely and pass traffic in between an endpoint and a server farm or a cloud. Peer-to-peer and the fog computing, which I already spoke about, and machine learning and analytics. Okay? After that, we'll talk to my CIO data. By the way, do you catch sort of an ego problem here with these T-shirts? What's your superpower? Because freaking miracle worker isn't an official job title, right? Something up there, right? So, not that I've ever encountered any personalities like that in the customers for whom I consult. But anyway, so in CIO's mind, right, security, more of a cost focus, right, shifting CapEx to APEX, the appeal of everything as a service, right? So when you think about your endpoint strategy, right, can that be done as a service, right? Should it be software instead of hardware? And then I like the T-shirt for the CISO, right? Broom's broken, so he became a CISO. But top of mind for them, right, as you would suspect, it's blockchain security, cryptography, IP theft prevention, using artificial intelligence to predict events. That's going to be a really big thing right now. And the interesting thing is, so from a traditional endpoint perspective, let's say you're running Windows endpoints or even a Linux endpoint, there's a lot of startups right now focusing on writing applications that it's going to be yet another layer that's going to sit on your endpoint that's going to run artificial intelligence algorithms against all the data that you do. Think of the CPU that's going to consume. Think of the network that's going to consume. Feed stuff back to a server and look for things, try to prevent things before they happen. In concept, it's great, but do we really need to go down that path? Why not go with sort of a software-based thin client, right? Have a secure operating system load and be able to compute out of the box securely without the need for that. Just because all these technologies are out there, whether it's artificial intelligence on the endpoint, anti-malware stuff, doesn't mean that you actually need to use them. There are other ways. At least that's my belief. So, kind of wrapping this up. I see time's been up for a while here. So tech company to partner with. How do you pick the company to partner with, right? In my mind, it's the one who sort of understands the trends. And I think there's two things here, right? It's what's happening and what's not. I know that's hard to read, but up there on the upward tick there, those are things that's IoT, deep learning, machine learning, and big data, right? So a couple of those things are areas where IGIL participates. The curve going downward is antivirus. Nobody wants to hear about it. Nobody wants to deal with it. It's largely ineffective. This concept of loading pattern files on our PCs and pushing them through the networks and updating them in real time, it's ridiculous. It's ineffective. More work than it's worth. So then the other thing is, you want to make sure that the tech company that you're partnering with, that they actually listen to customers, analysts, and partners. And again, I could say it until I'm blue about the importance of listening to customers. And like I had said, if you're not listening, you're building the wrong stuff and you're doing the wrong things. And then finally, Doug Brown had a crystal ball too. I think that you have to have a bit of a crystal ball. And that's why I went through sort of the history that I have in this space here, because I think that that's important, right? And Doug touched on a great point in that you have to understand where you've been to understand where we're going. Yes, I see time's up. Thank you. Let's see. And then, can I get my screens back? That was nasty. Let's see. I'll go by this then. Let's see. And then, you need to make sure the company that you're partnering with takes a software-driven approach, produces software that's absolutely laser-aligned to your needs, your partner's needs, has a scalable and future-proofed migration path, and then also it's very cost-effective and easy to support. So one thing that, let's see, so how does it relate to IGIL? First, I believe that the customers have spoken, right? Revenue is up. Software sales are up. Thin client market is declining, but IGIL's revenue is rising. Why is that, right? Because they're taking this pivot. They're pivoting to more of a software perspective. This is where the industry's going. Why are they doing this? Because they're listening to their customers, they're listening to their partners, they have their ear to the ground, they understand the trends, they understand the analysis that has to take place, they're doing the right things. And customers are buying less from larger competition. Since I left Dell, sales and thin clients are down. Sales and thin clients from HP are down as well. I'd like to believe that it's because I left them, but it's not. It's because the companies are not listening to the market. They're not building what the market wants. The market has spoken that they want a software approach. They don't want this continual hardware refresh cycle, right? So IGIL's sort of in the right place at the right time and doing the right thing for customers. And the interest, obviously, I can see from this event that the interest is really at an all-time high. Real quick, I recently did a study, and I checked with the customer, asked if I could share this data. He said it was absolutely fine. I did a study about probably about 120 people where I sent a survey out and said, what do you value most in software? It came up with kind of a top 10 list. Easy to use, intuitive, good UX, UI, fast, bug-free, clean interface, requires no training, minimal clicking and flexible output. This is a customer trying to build a software solution at a startup. And I thought this was really interesting, right? Because as I went through this stuff and I'm looking at the demos that I have of the IGEL software and talking to the folks at IGEL checks all the boxes, right? They've really got it right. And that's pretty impressive for any hardware company to pivot to software. And I tried to do that in my NeoWare past. We tried to do that at HP. We tried to do it at Dell. Really tough to make that transition. Speaks to the benefit of a smaller company that's actually able to make this pivot successfully. And finally, the little voices inside my head, Doug Keeley, tell me that IGEL really is listening. I think that IGEL is architecting environments that are inherently secure. They're extremely reliable. There's ways to breathe new life into endpoints. They're affordable. They're manageable. They're future-proof solutions. One environment, so one image across a bunch of different disparate devices is just a fantastic approach. It's good for any company, whether small or large, and they're committed. Look at the event that we just attended here at Disrupt. So anyway, I've overstayed my welcome here on stage, but I've enjoyed babbling at all of you, and hopefully it was somewhat interesting, and that's all I have.